I'm WG and it's time for another character guide, and this time one of my absolute all-time favorites in CHIZURU. We've seen her all the way back in November. It's been a few seasons since, and not only has she not fallen out of relevance but still stayed at the very top, and that is, even though I never really thought she needed them, she got buffed both in Season 1 and Season 2. So from this video you get the two main ways you can build CHIZURUs, as well as obviously a showcase on what each of those actually look like and how they are meant to be played. Then we'll also talk about obviously team comps, partners, gearing, cards in general, which Epiphanys are good, which aren't as great, and everything like that. So let's get into this CHIZURU guide, and what better way to start it than first explain what the hell is actually going on with all her keywords and her mechanics, just so we're all on the same plane of knowledge in that sense. And that is, first off, Cursed Jackets. This is a very important CHIZURU exclusive debuff that she can apply with her first special card, or her fourth total card, I guess you could say. And it's just, you apply this debuff to an enemy, and whenever that enemy gets hit by any attack card other than a bind card refers to this card specifically. You see the bind tag, we get to that in a second. When anything gets hit by anything that is not a bind card, you gain 1 Will-O-Wisp. And also it is based on the hit count, so if something hits something 6 times, you get 6 stacks of Will-O-Wisp. Now, what exactly is Will-O-Wisp? Will-O-Wisp is CHIZURU's lifeblood currency, and that is whenever you gain 5 Will-O-Wisps, they will be also shown below her HP bar, or below your HP bar next to CHIZURU in forms of these flames. Whenever you gain 5 of those, you create one of these. So every 5 you gain, 1 Shadow of the Moon gets created. And the most important part is when you then create another one, Shadow of the Moon and Shadow of the Moon fuse together, increasing the bind level by 1. The maximum bind level is 5, so it goes bind 1, then bind 2, all the way to bind 5, based on how many Shadow of the Moons you create. This stacks both when 2 Shadow of the Moons are in hand, or when you have multiple in your graveyard, they also stack with each other, meaning that the next time Shadow of the Moon goes back into your deck and into your hand, it will already be powered up. Now, the only other thing you need to know about Shadow of the Moon is this bind 3 transformation. And that is the moment you stack 3 Shadow of the Moons together, reach bind 3, you increase the base damage, you increase the hit count, you gain max HP recovery, as well as also overall, continue with the stacking, right? You can see the stacking, 80% damage for each bind stack stays similar, but you get a higher base damage amount as well as a higher hit count, plus a bit of healing going from Shadow of the Moon to Shadow of the Moon Plus. And then finally we have ourselves Inhibit, which is the buff inflicted, or buff I guess inflicted, because it's a bit of a two-edged sword. And that is because what Inhibit says that you cannot gain any AP or lose any AP outside of 2 very specific scenarios. Either when you take a monster's tenacity bar and you reduce it to 0, that gives you 1 AP, or when a CHIZURU is the one to provide the AP source. So there are certain cards in the game, or certain Divine Epiphanys, for example, that allow you to gain AP by playing a card. If that card comes from CHIZURU, you gain the AP. If it comes from any of the other 2 teammates, you do not get it. And then the other benefit on top is also the fact that you add an additional hit to Shadow of the Moon and Shadow of the Moon Plus, taking Shadow of the Moon from a 1 to a 2 hitter, and Shadow of the Moon Plus from a 2 to a 3 hitter. And that is then pretty much, the basics of what she is all about. So let's quickly go through the cards, then partners, gear fragments, all that beautiful stuff. Now, starting it off with Karmic Flames. This Karmic Flames here is the most versatile, and that is because when you apply this Karmic Flames to an enemy, not only do you get the buff to start generating the Will-O-Wisp, but the card also disappears. The card is so long gone out of your deck rotation until you defeat the enemy, and then that card comes back into your hand, allowing 2 benefits. Number 1, if you fight multiple enemies, you can apply it to an enemy, kill that enemy, apply it to the next, kill that enemy, apply it to the next, so on and so forth. But also it takes it out of your deck, meaning you have to draw through less cards, and overall you make your deck more potent, while to a degree even having this be draw 1, because it just won't be part of your deck. Now, all the other ones here, they all have their ups and downs, they all have their benefits. Like, for example, here, this one turns into a 3-hitter whenever it's already applied. So the way this works is it applies Curse Jackets, and if then this Karmic Flames were to be used on a target that already has the debuff, then instead it does this. So it goes from a 1-hitter to a 3-hitter. This decreases the cost of the next card of this unit used by 2. This one here just increases the, or multiplies the base damage amount, so 1 big hit rather than 3 smaller ones. And then this one here specifically also creates a Shadow of the Moon, so can be seen as inflict the debuff, generate 5 stacks of Will-O-Wisp. Now, you can absolutely use any of these or even the base version, but what you have to keep in mind is if you're not going for the 0-cost version, not only will you have to pay for them, but they will also be part of your deck, and unless you go out of your way to, for example, find a draw 1 neutral Epiphany or a draw 1 or draw a card of this unit Divine, there is a chance that this card just overall reduces the draw power that your deck has. But if you have ample draw, if you know you can draw your entire deck anyway, taking a Karmic Flames, if you can pay for the AP cost, also to be kept in mind, is still at the end of the day going to be free damage. Now, the next one is Tsukuyomi, yeah, one of her most versatile cards, and out of it, effectively, you have a couple different approaches. So, you have the upgrade approach, which just says whenever you use an attack card, you gain 2 stacks of Will-O-Wisp, so you gain extra Will-O-Wisp whenever CHIZURU herself uses an attack card. And then you also have this one right here, which just simply says that it adds 2 hits to the next Shadow of the Moon or Shadow of the Moon plus used. Important here is this, there is no turn specification, and this means exactly what you think. You can use an infinite amount of Tsukuyomis until you use your next Shadow of the Moon, which could then give it a hit count of hypothetically 1000. So this is, yeah, pretty much infinite scaling. And then on the other hand, we have a couple bit more of mixed ones here, where you get 3 Will-O-Wisps for each attack card of this unit in hand, meaning the more attack cards you have in hand, the more Will-O-Wisps you gain. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And then here it's just based on the amount of hit count, so preferably you want to use it on a high hit count ability or a high hit count whatever it might be, right? High hit count attack, and then you just get extra Will-O-Wisp specs for each hit of the next attack card, which you can then combine with the fact that you also get stacks when you hit something with Cursed Jackets. But overall, these two are by far my favorites. Then again, there is a world in which you can potentially just gain a bunch of stacks and gain a bunch of very high level Shadow of the Moons. Now, this final Bound at Dusk right here, yeah, this is the value. You have the issue, right? The debuff in the fact that now all of a sudden gaining AP is a little harder, but in exchange, for example here, at the start of the turn you decrease the cost of 2 random cards of other combatants. This is important, meaning those will never be CHIZURUs if you use the base version, whereas for example this one here decreases the cost of 2 random cards, but not other combatants, so it can also be CHIZURU's own cards, getting the cost reduction. And the interesting part here as well is it's until used and not for 1 turn. So that is then, yeah, just the straightforward 0 cost base version. And then we have just a couple variations, like for example this one just activates 2 random cards. Could be beneficial, could be unbeneficial. It's dependent on what exactly gets activated and how important it is for you to activate things in a specific order, but it can absolutely save you more AP than the other ones if we were to, for example, let's say activate a 3 AP card. Then here this one is more specific in that it allows you to activate random lead cards. So if we ever found like a really high cost, really high value lead card that we all wanted to activate, then you could use a Bound at Dusk like this to have those be forcefully activated. Though most lead cards tend to be upgrade cards, making this a bit harder to use. And then we also have, this one right here is just straightforward. Whatever your highest cost card is, it's going to be reduced by 2. So it still saves you 2 AP, but more specifically on just 1 specific card. Easier to use, pretty much same payout, just depends on if you have an expensive card in the first place. Whereas then the last one here is just that, potentially more cost generation than anything else. But the condition is you have to use a Shadow of the Moon plus before, making then the next card cost less. So there is a world in which this one is really good, but there is technically 3 deck types I'll talk about, but only 2 I can properly show, and the third one would really need some like major proper theory crafting to figure out what would exactly be the best on how to make it work. But yeah, my clear favorite here is just the 0 cost version, or if you're especially daring, you can do the 1 cost version with a bit of morale. And then we come to the last card, Oni Hunt, and that is where CHIZURU's scaling really takes off. And that is the entire purpose of these Oni Hunts for the most part, is just to work in conjunction with the ability to add hits. So on the one side you're buffing the hit count of Shadow of the Moon, now on the other side you're going to buff the damage of Shadow of the Moon itself. And then you can again stack this infinitely until you want to use it, leading to some really devastating Shadow of the Moons, where you have, 2 different versions. Either higher base damage and just a 2-hitter, so also lower count creation in terms of Will-O-Wisp when you hit something, but still the same 100% damage buff, or 4 hits, but also the 100% damage buff. And then the other 3 here, this one, honestly, I think this one's a bit weird, right? It's not that much better than the 4-hitter, right? Like 60 times 4 versus 120 times 3. And then if this is the only attack card in your hand outside of another Shadow of the Moon, all of a sudden it becomes a 5-hitter. Maybe it was a 6-hitter, maybe even higher than that. Maybe this could be valuable, but I guess at the end of the things, it's the highest basic hit count that you have, but I'm really not the biggest fan of this card specifically. This one here is just, super simple in that it gives you a permanent plus 80 to all Shadow of the Moons, and also 3 Will-O-Wisp, but I also really don't think much of it. And then we have one card that builds out an entire archetype for CHIZURU, and that is the Oni Hunt, which allows you to create 2 of her basic attack cards and have these basic attack cards get applied with exhaust, on top of also reducing their cost from 1 down to 0, allowing you to use 1 Oni Hunt for 1 to create 2 basic attack cards that all hit 2 times each at 0 cost to then be used, while also potentially taking advantage of the exhaust tag with beneficial effects, while also not clunking up your deck by creating a bunch of basics that then go in rotation. So that is pretty much that in terms of the CHIZURU cards and Epiphanys, and now we should all be on the same page, whereas then here we just have a bit of damage from the Moonlight of the High Tide. Now next up, partner. Overall, the psionics as a whole are in a bit more of a tough spot, and that is if you have it, the preferred partner obviously is going to be Itsuku, and that is because you gain 16% attack, you also get upwards of a 15% attack increase if cards stack, which refers to a bind card plus a bind card making bind 2, and then you get the most useless ability I've ever seen, and that is whenever an attack card used deals 3 hits, you also do a really tiny amount of fixed damage. Well, it's there. And then as the last skill, you get a 1 turn plus 50% damage amount to attack cards buff, similar to pretty much 2.5 morale stacks at your fingertips. Now, if you don't have an Itsuku and you still want to use something, the most obvious answer is going to be Eloise, where when you upgrade her, and especially with her being easier available, right? You will then get the full 16% attack. You will also get 20% damage amount to attack cards, and then the first time the assigned combatant either exhausts a card or gains a status ailment, you can increase the damage amount of attack cards by 24%. So while Eloise is really, really good, the main difference here would just be the, you see the attack stat, right? 101 versus 155. But if you are playing... So the 2 ways to take advantage of this is to either go with the exhaust skill card right here to trigger Eloise, or obviously to run instead the Oni Hunt card to create exhaust cards. That's how you can get the full Eloise partner effect. So yeah, she really isn't that bad of an option, but there's still a bit of a gap between her and the dedicated 5-star partner. There is no point trying to use the Rita partner for her outside of just getting the extra attack stat and the attack multiplier, because the rest of the effects really don't work for her. I also wouldn't really recommend the Terra because the stat difference is just bigger and Eloise is just better. And then if you do have her, Antea could be an option, so the Battle Pass partner, where you also get attack, health and damage amount increase. You see how it says attack increase and damage amount increase, so 2 times 12%. And then also when you create a card for the first time, which would be, for example, 5 Shadow of the Moon stacks, or 5 Will-O-Wisp stacks, making a Shadow of the Moon also gives you the upgrade, and then you could also get a stack of Vulnerable. So in order, it would probably go something similar to Itsuku, then Eloise, then Antea. It's a bit hard to say. I haven't fully tested them both head-to-head, Antea versus Eloise. Alright, so now in terms of potential, the easy ones are you want to max out the basic attacks, you want to max out the basic cards, and you want to max out the upgrade cards. So those are pretty much all her unique cards, all that make her strong. So these 3 are just the nice and simple ones. And then next up, you always want to make sure you get yourself the maxed out crit chance. It's just the most potent thing out of the entire tree, where then you can go through crit damage. You don't need to fully unlock it unless you really want to invest into her. So you can make your way right here to the ability to gain additional damage amount to her bind, so her Shadow of the Moon cards, based on the attack amount. Attack starting at going over 600 and then going all the way up to 1000 to a potentially 15% multiplier. But for example, the difference between a 15 and a 12% multiplier is 120 attack, and the multiplier additionally gained here is not that important, right? And then if you really fancy yourself a basic attack CHIZURU connoisseur, then getting the basic card proficiency for more damage as well as more if you have higher attack is useful. And then if you want to go that extra step, you can go for the divine chance. But overall, these 3 plus a bit of crit chance and the top one are the most important. Alright, let's talk memory fragments. So the easiest, the most attainable one is going to be a 2-piece featuring the Executioner's tool set as well as also the Blackwing shock set. So you do 12% attack, 25% crit damage, and then you can just smash whatever you feel like in. The options are open. You could, for example, go for the Agony set if you find yourself with Agony. You could go for example, even the HP set if you think you need some more HP, which could, for example, also help with the Shadow of the Moon healing a bit more. But overall, what you can also do is, if you're playing the basic attack build, you can go for the increased damage, shield and heal amount of basic cards by 20% through the Seth's Scarab set. So that's it when it comes to splitting it up in 2 pieces. Now, outside of that, there is, there's a couple 4-piece sets that you could use, but the main ones I would refer to, or the main ones I would specifically think about using, are, for example, going to be, weirdly enough, you can consider the Conqueror's Aspect. So Conqueror's Aspect gives you a crit damage increase of 1-cost cards. Most of CHIZURU's cards happen to be 1-cost cards, and you can play it in a way where you can play her cards at 1 cost. Just keep in mind, if you're not playing her cards at 1 cost, this set doesn't work. So that's why we're talking about it in a bit more of a niche sense. And then the next one, which is also again a bit more niche, would have to be the Offering of the Void. If you have a good enough set of it, it can absolutely be worth it. And that is because it says that when a card is exhausted, you increase the damage amount of Void cards by 20% for 1 turn. Meaning that so long as you have an exhaust card in her deck and you're using it every turn, you are getting the full benefit of the set. So now that we have those out of the way, let's talk about the 2 truly spicy ones, and that is going to be number 1, the Orb of Inhibition set, which flat out just adds 30% damage amount to void cards that have a hit count of 2 or more, which is applicable to any and all of CHIZURU's attack cards. So effectively you are adding pretty much 1.5 morale stacks on top of everything. So if it's, for example, a 2-hitter, you're actually adding plus 60 because it's 30 for the first, 30 for the second hit. If it's a 3-hitter, 90, so on and so forth. This set is absolutely fine and perfectly well to use. And the best, the best case would be the basic attack CHIZURU build. We'll talk about that again in a second. But no, my personal favorite, and I think especially at the moment, the best set for any and all Passion or Void characters, period, has to be the prelude to a hero set, where when a passion or void attribute attack card of this unit is discarded, plus 15% critical chance for 1 turn at maximum 15%, going upwards of maximum 2 stacks. So that's it going to be right there, and the only thing we need to pay attention to is just that we make sure that we discard an attack card of this unit so that we can get the crit chance bonus. Now in terms of 2 pieces, it's super easy. If you can manage it, you always want to go with the 25% crit damage. If that doesn't work, you can do the attack. If that doesn't work, you could do the crit, you could do the basic attack set, and you could kind of go down the list, or you could just leave it open. But if you can make it happen, this is what I think to be her strongest combination. Now then, in terms of pieces and where you go with what, it is pretty straightforward. At the top you want your crit chance. For the goblet, it really just comes down to what and where you have the most potent substat, so it's going to be either void damage or attack. It doesn't make a difference. Like for example, yes, if you go with attack there, you go closer to the 1000 mark, so the potential is better, but overall they don't take anything away from each other really. So it all pretty much just comes down to where you have the better substats. But if you can, void damage in terms of over attack is going to be a slight edge, and you're going to get more damage out of it. And then for the final piece, it's pretty straightforward, just go with attack. Now in terms of substats, it's honestly super easy. There's not a lot she cares about. At the very top of your substat priority is making sure your crit chance goes as high as possible, and then below that you'd have your attack in both attack and attack percentage values. And then next to that, I guess, crit damage. So make sure you prioritize crit chance, and then it's all about attack percentage, and crit damage. Whatever you can make happen makes her deal more damage. Duh, right? Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And then if you're curious, these are the CHIZURU stats that you use or see used throughout this. You can see we've made it up to 868 attack on 55.6% crit, so with the set effect triggering we go up to 70%, and we also have a rather sweet 215% crit damage. Obviously you don't need stats close to this to make sure that you get the same feats that you see here, but just know that she will be at a pretty high level of performance. And yes, you've also noticed she's level 61, so we've actually played her enough in the sortie to be able to level up one more time, giving her slightly more base stats. And then last but not least, let's quickly talk about her dupes. So her E1 is pretty simple and pretty straightforward. It just adds an additional plus 20% onto the base damage of Shadow of the Moon, so that it just deals more damage, as well as also it takes it from a 5% to an 8% heal. Shadow of the Moon is a bit more core to her identity, so it's a decent E1. The E2 itself just says that when you use a Shadow of the Moon, you create another Shadow of the Moon, meaning if you use a bind 3 or above, you get back 1 bind 1, meaning now you only need to go up 2 stages instead of 3 to get to the next Shadow of the Moon. And this is also the foundation of the Shadow of the Moon spam build that I briefly hint towards at the end, but I can't give you like a full build because I myself, or I don't think anyone has properly figured that one out. E3 obviously just damage. E4, nice damage increase where you can get upwards of plus 30% damage amount to all of CHIZURU's attack cards, so long as you create Shadow of the Moons. This is super easy to stack, super fast to stack, and it's just a damage bonus. This one is just 6% to all cards across the board. And then here, when Lunar Shard stacks to 3, meaning the E4 stacks to 3, you add an additional hit to Shadow of the Moon, which if you're playing the hit stacking build really doesn't make a difference if you're at 20 hits or 21. But if you just use a bunch of Shadow of the Moons, there is a rather noticeable difference going from a 3-hitter to a 4-hitter, or for just Shadow of the Moon, not the plus version, going from a 2 to a 3-hitter. So before we get into the full showcase, we obviously need to talk about the teammates, and first off we will be using Cassius. This Cassius deck might look scary, but I have an exact guide on how you can build this specific Cassius already on the channel. You can just go onto the channel and search for Cassius or Cassius guide, anything like that, and you will find us building this deck to the letter in the video and allowing you to also build it yourself. The most important parts you need to know is that we have morals and also draw, so this card replaces itself, costs us nothing. Overall it gives us upwards of 6 morale here. we gain a stack of morale here as well as a stack of morale there. Cassius himself provides stacks of morale when we complete his quests, and the quest in question is going to be the full house, which says that when each combatant has used a card, we create a full house. We can do that exactly 3 times, giving us 3 of these, so 3 further draw generated by Cassius, as well as also an additional morale stack per quest completed. What we then also have right here is a Persona of Luster, which is a part of the season 3. If you watch this at any time after season 3, you can still just go back and farm it up in the 0 system or whatever version this will have come up. But this is what we're using, where we have upwards of a 150% attack card damage bonus, as well as an action count increase. And then we also have some buffs right here, as you can see, in terms of when we actually manage to increase the action count of an enemy, we would gain extra damage, but depending on what you're facing, that might or might not be available. And then the last one is going to be one of my favorites to pair up with CHIZURU, and that is Narja. Now, this Narja here is honestly relatively straightforward, relatively basic in terms of the investment that is gone into her outside of Divines, and that is, we have this Shackles of Hunger, which mainly has Retain, meaning that you will never have to draw it once it's in your hand, making your deck smaller, but also the ability to apply upwards of a 200% damage bonus to the next attack card used, so long as you're just able to generate a bunch of Veracity. Now, then we also have ourselves Voluntary Control in its upgrade version, which means you only play it out once, and then each time a basic attack card inflicts a hit, we boost the damage of the basic attack card as well as also generate Veracity. So this is our Veracity generator, but also in general, it's an upgrade card, so it's out of the way, again making the deck smaller, the deck slimmer. The same is true for this Domain of Veracity, which just makes sure that each time Mealtime is used, we heal for 200%. And then we also just have Mealtime in here. Again, it has Retain, so we can use it whenever we want to, and it will stay in our hand. It could also potentially be a discard target. And that is exactly what this Mealtime does. We have a bit of a clutch here where we need it, a bit of attack, but you could potentially also cut any of these Mealtimes, or even maybe the Domain of Veracity or Voluntary Control out if you feel like it. Now, the key and the core card of what makes this Narja so nice is this. We gain 3 Veracity, so we get a bit of healing, we get a bit of a damage boost so long as Veracity stacks are active. But what we also gain is the next 2 times Veracity is used, we decrease the cost of 1 random card in hand, giving us a total of 2, 4, 6, 8 AP. There's 8 AP lying in these Bottomless Hungers right here. And then, as you've also noticed, they also draw another card when you use them. Overall, giving us a very slim Narja deck, but one that is deadly efficient. Alright, now finally onto the first deck that I'm going to show you, and that is Basic Attack CHIZURU. This Basic Attack CHIZURU features Karmic Flames with the exhaust, meaning we play it out once, then we never have to worry about it again. Tsukyomi to give us, whenever we use an attack card, 2 Will-O-Wisp to help with Will-O-Wisp stack generation. Bound at Dusk in its basic version or non-Epiphany version with 1 additional morale, though I have to be honest, I will change it at some point to the 0 cost version, because this allows us to also reduce the cost of the CHIZURU cards rather than random cards, making it more likely for us to get the full benefit of the cost reduction at the start of the turn. But both of them are absolutely fine. And then the key and the core is going to be made up by 4 of these Oni Hunts. They create 2 Moon Slashes and apply exhaust to them, and also 1 draw. This 1 draw is on 3 of those, and the 4th one is without it, and the purpose is to save us 20 save data. You'll see in a second. But yeah, the core is that we have 3 of these Oni Hunts that will then also draw ourselves something. And then the final part is just going to be a Persona of Obsidian, which, importantly enough, has the ability to discard up to 2 cards, give us a massive damage bonus of upwards of 120%, 60 per discard, and a 60% multiplicative damage increase. And as you might have noticed from the gear set we've chosen, this is our way of discarding a CHIZURU attack card to allow us to trigger the set effect and get the 15% crit. Now, in terms of gear pieces, we have a Amorphous Cube with damage amount and increased damage of exhaust cards, these Moon Slashes will turn exhaust through Oni Hunt. What is also important to note here is that this deck, as you might have seen, is farmed on the Void planet. So that means on the Void planet, yes, this is very desirable because all her cards will, in most cases, end up being 0 cost when you play them, meaning it's the perfect weapon to pair her with. But also on the Void planet, you would have access to this item right here, the Eye of the Eyeless. If you can get both a something like a Cthulhu gun or the Foggy Crystal Ball with the Eye of the Eyeless, then that would be perfect because it is a bigger damage increase than what you gain from, for example, a Amorphous Cube. But on top of that, we also have a damage increase based on cards in the graveyard and a action count damage increase, as well as you've already seen the exhaust card increase. So for this damage and yeah, how do you play this deck showcase, is not something I would usually do, and that is I accidentally reset the tower. This is the guy from floor 135, if I'm not wrong. He's the guy who has effectively the highest HP in the game, and that is because he has 179,000, but he also HP regenerates after getting pushed below half, bringing him, I think, closer to somewhere like 215,000 HP. So it's the best guy to showcase off any damage increases while being high enough to pretty much guarantee you beating the entirety of the tower. And what we'll be doing is I'll mainly be explaining the gameplay choices made here, while you will then have the ability to have a look at what exactly happens. So we're starting off this fight, and what the most important part is, we need to make sure that we do not overcap our hand. That is at its core the most important. So what just happened here is we used the Narja card to draw a card, and if you take a look at the top left, you see our Cassius has these 3 mannequins. The left one is Narja, the right one is CHIZURU, in the middle is Cassius, and when we use a card of all 3, we generate a quest card, which is what we just did right there. And that is what now put us up to 10 cards in hand. The card replaces itself. We use one of the cards that we generated through the upgrade card, an empowered skill card, to give ourselves a bit of additional draw. And then now we're just, pretty much trying to see how do we do this best, how do we play the entirety of our deck to then finish it off with a bunch of hard-hitting Oni hunts. You see we have a Moon Slash, this is a leftover from one of the prior fights, and now we can just discard 2 cards. So we get the full discard benefit, we've discarded a attack card, so we've triggered the set effect, and now we just have to cycle through our deck enough to get the discarded cards back. So here we're just using the Devil Dices to, for example, gain the morale, use the Narja cards to get us the stacks so that we can get the cost decreases. And what is also important is what you notice is every time this dice hits, or every time anything hits, you see it's both a hit, but also this Oni Hunt now went from a 1 cost to a 0 cost because we've used the Stack of Veracity. You see the Bottomless Hunger -1 decreasing the cost of Oni Hunt, because our goal is to try to keep as much as possible of our natural AP, because we need it towards the end, and we preferably want to play cards at 0 cost. Same with, for example, the Persona of Luster there. What you can now also see is that we're finished with the Cassius quest, so now our mission is only to draw the entirety of our deck, go through it, and then just hit the boss with everything we have. So what we've done here is pretty simple. We've used up the buffing card. You can see in the top left we have enough stacks. So we reduced the stacks by 5, gained 3 stacks of predation, so 100% damage buff. We also gained a further 200% damage buff, and the main usage for this is to just use our Shadow of the Moon Plus that is fully stacked to just hit the boss with about as hard as it can be at 2429% times 3. So that's what we'll be opening it up with against the boss, and you can see a 7574 hit. One of the hits didn't crit, but at a 70% chance, hey, what can you do about it? Now we're just pretty much going through the rest of our hands, making sure that, we let the boss know how we feel about this entire scenario. What is important to note here is that these damage numbers would also, for example, be higher if the boss had an action count to be increased, because a couple of the buffs would, for example, benefit from something like that. Now here we just want to make sure we get the most out of the Shadow of the Moons. This was again the cost reduction from Bottomless Hunger. So we use the Shadow of the Moon again for a bit more damage, getting the rest in, playing those out, and every time we hit that is the important part. Every time we use an attack card, so one Moon Slash gives us 2 stacks. Every time it hits something, it also gives us 2 stacks further. And that is how we're generating all these stacks to then end up upgrading Shadow of the Moon. And the Shadow of the Moon coming back earlier is due to the E2, for example. So now again, we create another Shadow of the Moon, hit the enemy again, and then you see we go below the HP threshold, enemy heals back up by 35,000, and then we pretty much just continue on with it. You can see our damage amount being at around 109,000, finished off with another Shadow of the Moon, leaving us at, well, I guess we have one more. Leaving us at 135,685 damage for one turn. Having us go into the next turn, where we now have obviously the boss mechanic, and that is that this boss is now enraged, and we either reduce his HP count down below the white threshold to reduce his damage that he's expected to put out against us, or we just rely on the fact that we have a max HP count of 2,200, that we have fortitude stacks, that we will gain further fortitude stacks when completing Cassius quests, that we will reduce the enemy morale when completing Cassius quests, to pretty much allow us to just tank the hit. So here we are basically going to be just ending up playing the same rotation as before. Now for the second deck, and that is stacking CHIZURU. We will go with the same Karmic Flames, the 0 cost exhaust version. We will also have the Bounded Dusk, this time with the 0 cost version, which allows us to reduce the cost of any cards and not just other combatants, as well as also it being 0 cost. And then here the keys are going to be that we have 3 Oni Huns and 2 Tsukuyomis. The Tsukuyomis are add 2 hits to the next Shadow of the Moon twice, so which means over the course of one turn we'll add 4 additional hits to a Tsukuyomi, through it to a Shadow of the Moon. One of them has the draw 1 cards of this unit divine, the other has no divine, and then the next ones are gonna be these Oni Huns, where they are all the 60 times 4 plus 100% damage amount to the next bind card used. So we're adding 300% damage amount to the next bind card used, or the equivalent of around 15 morale stacks, 5 each. The most important thing I'll let it be known here is that these divines are by no means optimal. This is just me smacking a couple orbs in, seeing what works. But I still believe that the 3 Tsukuyomi to the 2 Tsukuyomis to 3 Oni Huns, it is the perfect split, the 2-3 split, with Oni Huns having the favor due to them adding 100% damage, whereas this one, the hit count gets diminished rather quickly. as well as also, for example, what we'll be facing off is against a elasticity boss, meaning that any hits above 7 get reduced. The trick though is with a Shadow of the Moon Plus, we have 3 hits through the Bind card, through Bounded Dusk, and with Tsukyomi we are adding 2 more, making sure that we're never going above the 7 hit limit and getting the full power in one turn. So if I were to have the ability to add any divines, I would just simply add a draw 1 or a draw 1 of this unit, or I guess even treat it as a common card onto this Tsukyomi as well as this one. So preferably it goes draw 1 of this unit, and then the last one would be the common card one. And then I would do 1 divine on one of these Oni Hans, either something like reduce cost or draw 1 card of this unit, depending on what you have available. And yeah, the reason why we're doing this is again to make space for this specific persona. Discard 2 damage per discard, 60% damage amount of attack cards of this unit, allowing us to discard 1 of her cards, trigger the set effect, get the set effect bonus, get the bonus from the persona, and yeah, make sure we start damaging things. And then in terms of weapons, we have the Cthulhu gun, as well as a bit of a critical damage increase when there are cards in the graveyard. We are actually going to be getting a bit of HP reduction, but a shield when used an attack card, which is, I guess, funny enough. And then here we have the dice when a card is discarded by an allied damage amount, so we'll only ever really get around 30% of it from Persona of Obsidian. And then also if a card was discarded, 100% damage amount to the next card of this unit that is used manually at 1 time per turn. These debuffs, like these ones, could definitely be improved, but at least the gear itself is on the better side. Whereas again, yeah, it goes pretty much for everything, right? So the real question is, what do you go with, right? But I think Criticism of Discord is still the best one, and then here you could probably simply just go, for example, for the plus 25% Amorphous Cube, which would be permanently active. And then in terms of, yeah, buffs, you just look for what you can get. Alright, same scenario as before, 215k HP guy, me giving you a bit of the flavor text of what exactly is happening here, especially for that first turn. It's not going to be that different from what we've played the last turn, but it's still going to be what it is, right? So we have again the quest generated from the upgrade card, drawing us another card, hitting the enemy, making sure we fill up the, the next quest so we can play full house for a bit more draw. Now we're going to get our discard in here because we're generating Shadow of the Moons anyway. We'll actually be getting rid of 1 Shadow of the Moon and even a mealtime, because the mealtime is not that important to us actually getting drawn, and it still works for the discarded effect. So boosts both the cube and the set effect, right? And then right here, obviously, Persona, we get the damage buff in, we get our first 2 hits in, and now with the Joker, we'll just be searching out for a Narja card to, again, complete the quest line, draw a couple more of our cards, as you see right here. And this is kind of where it came in with me saying that the cost reduction really wasn't that important, especially in this setup. We should have more than enough cost, so we're basically overcapping by quite a good margin in terms of Narja AP gen. She's mainly just here for a bit of additional draw and could just be replaced by any other draw related character, because the synergy isn't as strong as between her and somebody else when it comes to boosting her in comparison to the basic attack build. So here she's not as important. And then you see right here just the straight up buffs going in. We also again get the damage buff, but what you've noticed is the damage buff didn't work, and that is because we actually went through all the veracity stacks. You can see there's no veracity stacks, so the damage buffing card didn't actually even work here. Again, she's mainly just there to allow CHIZURU or us to cycle through our deck and get things set up. And you see it's at 0 cost, we have 3 AP. It's a bit of an overkill, but at the end of the day it gets the job done. And then here we have 2264%, this time importantly by 7. So here we go in, hit the enemy, you see 8624, upwards of a times 7, 96,000 damage in a turn, even though it didn't even look like that, because what you can never forget is why Shadow of the Moon is the big finisher. The 4-hit Oni Hunts themselves are also already incredibly potent. So now we're pretty much just going to run the same rotation. This is a lot easier, right? make sure you get the Tsukuyomis out, make sure you get the Oni Hunts out, finish enemy off with Big Shadow of the Moon, rinse and repeat. If the elasticity debuff wasn't a thing, we could also hypothetically just end up stacking Shadow of the Moon over the turns over and over and over and over and over again, and end up with something like a 20,000 damage times 200 Shadow of the Moon that just does like 3 million damage. But that's not something that is possible to be done in the tower due to the limitation of only going for 7 hits. If I really wanted to impress you, I could have also went in here, saved up all these Oni Hunt buffs and never used Shadow of the Moon in the earlier fights, but this never was the idea here. This is effectively showing you what you can expect, what you can achieve within a singular turn. So once again, you can see 2,339 times 7, big hit, big boom. Bam, there you go, another 80,000 damage. And then here, I mean, we get another Shadow of the Moon, might as well get it out there. And then here for the finale, it's again pretty much gonna be something eerily similar. Though, then again, there is a good chance I might just end up dying here, because look at my HP amount. I remember now. There you go. So, obviously, the solution here is quite straightforward. If you're wondering, ooh, can the CHIZURU even beat him? The answer is simple. Just make sure that these last 20,000 HP, that you either, for example, bring another damage dealer instead of Narja, somebody that can just fit in easier, maybe something like a Ray, or even an Orlea if you fancy something like that to help build up the Shadow of the Moon. So Orlea could just be there, you have a softie there, you just buff it, and you only buff the softie either to boost up the Oni Hunts or to boost up the Shadow of the Moon at the end, especially with you using it. Or you just make sure that you just attack the enemy a little earlier. You can see we still have a bunch of ego points that could have been used. We have availability to just play out, for example, Devil Dice earlier, to play a Tsukuyomi earlier, to just create a Shadow of the Moon earlier, to hit the enemy earlier, maybe not even use the Shadow of the Moon from before. But I hope you get the idea where here this deck is kept, yes, by the Tower of Screams multiplier with only the 7 hits. If you, for example, were to stack this over 1 turns, 2 turns, 3 turns, the results become significantly more ridiculous, right? Significantly more ridiculous. But what is more important is the fact that even with the 7 hit cap, it is still an incredibly deadly deck, I guess, held by me choosing Narja as a partner, in this case a bit more for convenience. So as this last part, what kind of teammates in general fit CHIZURU? What else should you be running with her? So CHIZURU and Narja, they really just go incredibly well together. There is no doubt about it, no two ways about it. And you can always pair up CHIZURU with another multi-hit character, be it a Rin, be it a Luke, or even somebody that isn't necessarily multi-hit, just multi-attacks. In terms of a lot of attacks, because keep in mind, every enemy that is inflicted with her cursed shackles also helps you generate stacks for CHIZURU so long as that target gets hit. So anything that has a high hit count can be a support for her to gain more stacks, build up more stacks, and then use a more empowered Shadow of the Moons. And then, yeah, in terms of supports, right, you don't actually have to use Ray, you don't have to use Cassius, Narja, Ray, CHIZURU. You could also just do a simple Ray, CHIZURU, Narja team, for example, and that is because you have access to something like this right here. An incredible boost to basic attack damage amount. This can definitely also end up outshining a Cassius. You also have this increase to just 1-cost cards, which you could either swap to void cards, or in general just 1-cost or lower cards. Both end up pretty much giving you similar results. And then you also have, for example, something like this here, which is just plus 50 to all void attack cards, or again, yeah, 2.5 morale stack equivalent, or potentially something like this right here, where you will permanently increase the damage amount of, let's say, something like a Shadow of the Moon by plus 50. But I'm not entirely too sure how that ends up working with like a Shadow of the Moon getting upgraded and then bound and then used and then re-put together. So that one would be a lot more iffy, where something like a just plus 100 would be a lot more straightforward. as I've mentioned, right, if you can set it up properly, if you want an idea of how an Olea deck would look like if you were to run it with her, it would be something like this. You have one growing creature, you have these growth accelerations which just help you retain this growing creature a lot of times, allowing it to, or allowing, yeah, the softie to just give you a bunch of damage increase amounts every time you retain it, 70% per, upwards of 8 times. You can see again, one of them is not divine. The reason for that is either so you can make space for something like a persona, or what I've done here more specifically is I actually went out of my way. I went out of my way just to get rid of a sacred sensor because I didn't want to create any random creatures, because they could have, for example, been something like a Swiftie, ruining all my attack stacks, for example. And also all of these are like pretty much just random creations. But then again, you can absolutely live with the sacred sensor. And if you put in something similar to like a Cassius support buff card, just keep in mind it's again an attack, so it would also reduce your growing creature stacks. So it's not that important. But this deck, super simple, super straightforward, and absolutely just gets the job done. That is this Olea right here. And then, yeah, other teammates you can obviously always pair with a Nia. You can pair with a Mika. The more AP, the better, you know the deal. Nia obviously especially potent right now with everything just being discard focused, and her also having access to something like a Eternal Hunger. Let's see if we can find it right here. There you go, right? That card obviously available and usable in the Great Rift as well. Yeah, and I think those are about the most I can think of right now. One problem with Typhara would be that Typhara's buffs are only to the next hit, right? The first hit of the next attack card used, so they don't scale for any crazy multi-hitters. And then the final part is just gonna simply have to revolve around that mysterious third deck I've hinted towards quite a few times. And that is, I think, I can't really prove it to you, but I think there's a lot of value to this E2 in unlocking something along the lines of like a Shadow of the Moon spam deck, where your entire goal is preferably to just create as many Shadow of the Moons as possible and then end up using those, right? And one of the ways you could do that is specifically with this one right here. That whenever you use a Shadow of the Moon plus or a Shadow of the Moon at 3 bind stacks, you will reduce the cost of the next card you use by 1. The important part here though is if the next card you use ends up being a 0 cost card, I still believe this 1 card cost reduction actually goes away, so you have to make sure that you go into other valuable cards. But depending on how many Shadow of the Moons you use, this is more and more and more and more AP throughout the turn. And I think one of the things that could potentially enable this would be something like this right here, where, for example, if a Shadow of the Moon has a hit count of 3, and you add 4 Will-O-Wisp for each hit of the next attack card of this unit used, which would then be the Shadow of the Moon. You play this Tsukumi, use the Shadow of the Moon, you get 12 Will-O-Wisp stacks. 12 Will-O-Wisp stacks allow you to generate 2 more Will-O-Wisps. So, for example, with 4 copies of this Tsukumi, if you use this and then a Shadow of the Moon, if you have, for example, the E2, you would have enough to create another Shadow of the Moon 3, which you could then use another one, so on and so forth. Or more specifically, as we've talked about briefly before, that is, you could also just use a teammate with a high hit count, or any combination of these, like for example 2 Will-O-Wisp every time you use a card, or adding a hit to the Shadow of the Moon and then getting less. So this would be, I think, around 8, because you go from a 3 hitter to a 4 hitter, but only 2 per. There's a lot of ways you could twist this, but I'm not entirely too sure how efficient it is, nor do I know what the end idea would be. So how many Shadow of the Moon pluses could you realistically end up playing in a turn? I really do not know, which is why this third deck is a bit more of like a theory craft idea. If any of you have a finished one, feel free to send me a message on Discord, leave it down in the comments, or just keep it to yourself because it's your dearest treasure. Peace!